High up on a mossy hill, right at the very edge of a prehistoric jungle, there stood a wizard's tower. It was the kind of tower that seemed to grow right out of the earth itself, with smooth stone walls that hummed softly in the breeze, and windows that glowed the warmest shade of amber every evening, like little suns tucked behind the glass. Living in that tower was a small, round-bellied creature called Figgy. Figgy had big, curious eyes, the color of honeycomb, soft tufted ears that twitched when something interesting was nearby, and a habit of wearing an enormous woolly hat, even in summer. Figgy loved the tower more than anything in the world. The creaking staircases, the shelves full of glittering jars, and especially the view of the jungle below, where enormous ferns swayed like sleepy giants and ancient trees touched the clouds. But today had not been a good day. Not even a little bit. It had started when Figgy accidentally knocked over a jar of sparkling sneezing powder, which made the whole tower sneeze 17 times in a row. Then the enchanted broom refused to sweep, choosing instead to chase 3 very startled frogs around the kitchen. And worst of all, Figgy had spent the entire afternoon trying to bake a moonberry pie, only to open the oven and find a perfectly round, perfectly terrible, completely burnt black disc that looked more like a fallen meteor than anything you might eat for dessert. By the time the sun began to dip below the fern tops, Figgy was sitting on the front step of the tower, chin resting in both hands, wearing the most thoroughly dejected expression a small creature with a woolly hat could possibly manage. That was when Marco came bounding up the hill. Marco was 7 years old, bold as a thunderclap, and absolutely, completely, 100% convinced that he was a dinosaur. He had been convinced of this for quite some time. He walked with a stomping, earth-shaking stride. He roared when he was happy. He roared louder when he was excited. And right now, running up the hill toward Figgy, with his arms held out wide like small wings, and his chin jutting forward with tremendous dinosaur dignity, Marco was very excited indeed. "Figgy!" he bellowed, which sounded something like a roar if you used a great deal of imagination. "Figgy, you have to come and see. The footprint is doing the thing, the starlight thing." Figgy blinked. "Already? But the sun has barely gone." "It's starting," Marco insisted, stomping to a stop and puffing out his chest. "Eldarin is already there. He says tonight is a special night. He says the light will be extra bright." Figgy looked back at the tower, thought briefly of the burnt pie and the sneezing broom and the 17 tower sneezes, and then stood up, tugged the woolly hat down firmly and said, "All right, let's go." At the very base of the hill, just where the soft grass met the first great roots of the prehistoric jungle, there was a clearing. And in the middle of that clearing was the footprint. It was enormous, as wide across as 3 children lying head to toe, pressed deep into a flat shelf of pale grey stone by some magnificent creature that had walked this way long, long ago, when the world was younger and wilder and full of thundering giants. The edges of the footprint were perfectly smooth, worn by centuries of wind and gentle rain, and the 3 great toe marks at the front curved upward like a cupped hand, waiting to receive something wonderful. During the day, the footprint was simply beautiful. A piece of ancient history sitting quietly in the clearing, reminding everyone who saw it that extraordinary things had once walked this earth. But at night, it was something else entirely. As Figgy and Marco arrived at the clearing, they found it already full of villagers. Old ones wrapped in shawls, little ones sitting cross-legged in the grass, families pressed close together in the warm evening hush. And there, settled comfortably on a great flat rock at the edge of the clearing, like a mountain that had decided to get comfortable, was Eldarin. Eldarin was a dragon. but not the fearsome, fire-breathing, treasure-hoarding sort that you might have heard about in other stories. Eldarin was ancient and vast and extraordinarily gentle, with scales the deep greenish-grey of a river at dusk and eyes that were the colour of amber held up to candlelight. His wings were folded neatly at his sides, like enormous fans put away for the evening, and when he breathed, you could hear a sound like distant bells. Every night, Eldarin came to the clearing, and every night he told the village a story. He had been doing this for longer than anyone could remember. His stories were like warm blankets pulled up to the chin. They were like the smell of bread baking and rain on roof tiles, and the last sweet moments before sleep. The villagers came every evening, not just because the stories were wonderful, though they were, but because being near Eldarin made everything feel safe and still and perfectly all right. Figgy settled into the grass beside Marco, who immediately arranged himself in what he considered a very appropriate dinosaur resting position. That is, flat on his stomach, with his chin propped up and his feet kicked up behind him. Around them, the jungle sighed its evening sigh, and fireflies began to drift up from the ferns like tiny wandering stars. "Ah," said Eldarin, in a voice like rolling thunder wrapped in velvet. "Figgy, I heard today was a rather difficult one." Figgy looked up, surprised. "How did you know?" Eldarin's great amber eyes crinkled warmly at the corners. "The tower sneezed 17 times. We all heard it in the village. The frogs told us about the broom." Marco snorted, which turned into a roar, which turned into a giggle. "It was a terrible day," Figgy said quietly, pulling the woolly hat down over both ears. "Everything went wrong. Everything." Eldarin nodded slowly, the way very old, very wise creatures nod, as if the nod itself carries the weight of everything they have ever understood. "Then tonight's story," he said, "is exactly the right one for you." And as if the night had been waiting for precisely that moment, the footprint began to glow. It started at the very edges, a thin silver line, like moonlight poured into a crack. Then it spread, quietly and steadily, filling every curve and hollow of the ancient impression with a soft, shimmering light that was not quite silver and not quite gold, but something lovely in between. The starlight, for that is what it was, starlight that had fallen and gathered here over centuries, pooled like water in this perfect stone cup, rose up in a gentle shimmer that made everyone in the clearing feel as though they were sitting inside a lantern. Marco breathed out a long, reverent "whoo." Figgy said nothing at all. There were no words. Eldarin began. "Once," he said, and his voice was so low and warm that Figgy could feel it in the ground, "there was a young river who had a very bad day. She tried to flow north and found a mountain in the way. She tried to flow east and found a desert, dry and unyielding. She turned and could not find her path, and the whole day long she felt tangled and lost and wrong." Marco rested his chin on his hands. Around the clearing, small heads leaned against bigger shoulders. Eyelids grew heavy. "But," Eldarin continued, "when evening came, the young river grew still, and in the stillness she noticed something. The mountain had, in trying to stop her, given her a waterfall, the most beautiful waterfall in all the world. The desert had taught her to carve a canyon which would one day be full of birdsong and blossoms. Every obstacle she saw now had been quietly making her into something more magnificent than she had planned." Figgy stared at the glowing footprint and thought, quite unexpectedly, about the burnt pie, and the frogs, and the sneezing tower, and felt, for the first time all day, the very edge of a smile. "The best thing about a bad day," Eldarin said gently, "is that it always, always ends. And when it ends, you find that you are still here, still whole. And the night, the kind, quiet night, has come to tuck it away and begin something new. The starlight in the footprint pulsed once, softly, like a heartbeat. Figgy looked at it and thought about how that enormous ancient creature had once walked right here, in this very spot, and pressed its enormous foot into this stone, not knowing that millions of years later, its footprint would fill with starlight and make a small, round-bellied creature with a woolly hat feel, against all odds, entirely better. Marco had gone very quiet beside Figgy. His eyes were blinking slowly, the long blinks of someone losing the battle against sleep with great dignity. "I would have roared at the mountain," he murmured. "If I were the river, I would have roared very loud." "I know you would have," Figgy said softly. "That would have helped," Marco said, though his voice had gone soft and far away. "Roaring always helps." He did not say anything after that. Eldarin's story continued, low and warm and winding, curling through the clearing like smoke from a gentle fire, and one by one the villagers grew still. The fireflies drifted, the jungle breathed. The footprint glowed on, patient and lovely, full of all the light that had ever fallen on this ancient, gentle place. Figgy leaned back in the grass and looked up at the sky. The stars above the prehistoric jungle were extraordinary, thick and bright and close, as though the sky itself had leaned down to listen to Eldarin's story. The bad day, Figgy thought, was really and truly ending now. The sneezing and the broom and the burned pie were still there in the memory. Yes, but they had gone soft at the edges, the way things do when night comes and wraps them up and carries them off somewhere quiet. Tomorrow there would be a new pie. Tomorrow the broom might behave. Tomorrow was a whole new, completely unbothered, fresh and open thing. Figgy felt a great yawn rise up from somewhere very deep inside. A warm, full, satisfied yawn that stretched from the tips of woolly hat-covered ears all the way down to the very smallest toes. The starlight from the footprint fell softly across the grass, across Marco's sleeping face, across the clearing full of still and dreaming people. Figgy's eyes fluttered, then closed, then fluttered once more, just barely. Eldarin's voice was the last thing, low and lovely as distant thunder, as warm as the very idea of home. And Figgy smiled and breathed, and let the good quiet night do what it had always promised to do. Carry the bad day gently away, and leave only the starlight and the stillness, and the soft, sweet beginning of a dream.